Imagine this. You're on a weekend getaway with the person you love most, driving through the endless, sun-scorched expanse of the Utah desert. The world feels alive with possibility, golden sunsets, starlit nights, and the promise of a few days away from it all. Then, in an instant, you vanish. Not just lost, but gone, swallowed by the wilderness without a trace. Your family waits, hopes, searches. But years pass, 8 long years, and you're nowhere to be found. Then one day, in 2019, a discovery shocks the world. You're found, not in a forest, not at the bottom of a lake, but deep inside an abandoned mine, sealed shut from the inside. You're sitting there, side by side with your partner, as if you'd simply fallen asleep. Your head's bowed, your hands close. But you're not asleep. You're gone, your body's preserved in the dry desert air, your legs shattered with multiple fractures. How did you end up here? Who sealed you in? And why? This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is the real, bone-chilling story of Emma and Liam, a young couple from Colorado who set out for a simple camping trip in 2011 and vanished into one of the most haunting mysteries you'll ever hear. Emma was 27, a bright, kind-hearted woman who loved capturing the world through her camera lens. Liam, 29, was her rock, a guy with a quick smile and a knack for making her laugh. They weren't adrenaline junkies or seasoned explorers, just two people who wanted a weekend of quiet moments under the desert sky. They packed their SUV with a tent, some water, a few snacks, and their dreams of a perfect getaway. Emma sent a quick text to her brother before they left. "Off to Utah. Back Sunday night. Love ya." That was the last anyone heard from them. For 8 years, the disappearance baffled everyone. Their families clung to fading hope, while police and volunteers scoured the vast Utah desert, a place where canyons stretch endlessly and old roads vanish into dust. No car, no tent, no sign of life. It was as if Emma and Liam had been erased from the earth. Theories swirled. Did they get lost? Run out of water? Or was something darker at play? When their SUV was finally found, abandoned on a forgotten road with its hazard lights flickering, it only deepened the mystery. The GPS pointed to an old uranium mine, a relic of a bygone era. But what lay inside that mine would turn this case into a nightmare no one could have predicted. What happened to Emma and Liam in that desolate corner of Utah? How did a weekend escape turn into a decade-long enigma? And who, or what, sealed them inside a tomb of stone and darkness? This is the Crime O'Clock, and today, we're diving into a story that will grip you, haunt you, and leave you questioning the depths of human cruelty. Stick with us as we unravel the terrifying truth behind Emma and Liam's fate, a truth more shocking than anything you could imagine. Before we dive into this chilling tale, let's get you involved. Have you ever felt that eerie chill in a remote place, like you're not as alone as you think? Maybe a hike in the woods or a drive through nowhere gave you goosebumps. Drop your story in the comments. What would you do if you were stranded in the middle of the desert with no way to call for help? Your thoughts fuel our community. So hit that comment section and let's start this journey together. Let's rewind to the spring of 2011, to a moment when life felt full of promise for Emma and Liam. Picture a couple who could be your neighbors, your friends, maybe even you and your partner. Emma, 27, was the kind of person who lit up a room without trying. She had this infectious laugh, a knack for finding beauty in the smallest things, like the way sunlight danced on a dew-covered leaf. She was an amateur photographer, always carrying her beat-up camera, ready to capture the world's quiet magic. Liam, 29, was her perfect counterpart. He was steady, dependable, with a dry sense of humor that could make Emma giggle even on her worst days. They weren't the type to chase thrills or court danger. They were just two people who loved each other deeply, who found joy in the simple things, late-night talks, shared coffee in the morning, and the occasional escape from the grind of their Colorado lives. Emma and Liam lived in a cozy apartment in a small town just outside Denver. Their days were filled with the usual, work, errands, checking in on their aging tabby cat, Muffin, who they'd jokingly argue over spoiling. But they had a ritual that kept their spark alive. Every few months, they'd plan a weekend getaway. Nothing extravagant, just a chance to unplug, breathe, and be together. Sometimes it was a cabin in the Rockies, sometimes a lake, where Liam would try and fail to fish while Emma snapped photos. This time, they set their sights on something different, something a little wilder. The remote desert lands of southern Utah, a place where the earth stretched out in endless waves of red rock and mystery. Why Utah? Well, it started with a photo Emma found online, an old, rusted sign half buried in sand, surrounded by jagged canyons glowing under a sunset. The area was dotted with abandoned uranium mines from the mid-20th century, relics of a time when prospectors chased dreams of wealth in the desert's depths. To Emma, it wasn't about the mines themselves. It was the idea of capturing something untouched, something raw. The barren landscape, the crumbling equipment, the forgotten roads. It all felt like a canvas for her camera. Liam was all in as always, happy to see her eyes light up at the thought of a new adventure. They weren't planning to poke around in dangerous old mines or play survivalist. Their plan was simple. Drive out, pitch a tent, take some photos, and soak in the silence of a place far from the noise of the world. They spent the week before their trip buzzing with excitement. Emma pored over maps, circling a spot not too far from a cluster of those old mines, a place where the views promised to be breathtaking. Liam checked their trusty SUV, a 2003 model they'd nicknamed Old Blue, making sure it was ready for the long drive. They packed light but smart, gallons of water, canned food, granola bars, a sturdy tent, sleeping bags, and a first aid kit, just in case. Emma tossed in her camera and an extra battery, dreaming of the shots she'd get at golden hour. Liam threw in a dog-eared book of desert poetry he'd read to her by the campfire, a little romantic gesture that made her roll her eyes but secretly melt. They weren't gearing up for an expedition into the unknown. They were packing for a weekend of memories, a chance to feel free under a vast desert sky. On that Friday morning in April 2011, the air was crisp, the kind of morning that feels like a fresh start. Emma and Liam loaded up Old Blue, gave Muffin a scratch behind the ears, and asked their neighbor to check on him over the weekend. Before they hit the road, Emma sent a quick text to her brother, Matt. Off to Utah. Back Sunday night. Love ya. Liam cranked the radio, some classic rock tune filling the car as they pulled out of their driveway, laughing about who'd picked the playlist for the 6-hour drive. They were headed for a spot in southern Utah, a stretch of desert where the old uranium mines sat quiet, their entrances like dark scars on the landscape. The plan was to camp for 3 days and 2 nights, take in the scenery, and be back home by Sunday evening, ready to face the work week with sun-kissed faces and a camera full of photos. There was nothing to suggest this trip would be anything but perfect. They had enough supplies, a reliable car, and each other. They weren't chasing danger or tempting fate. They were just a couple in love, looking for a few days of peace in a place where the world felt bigger, wilder, untouched. But as they drove toward that desert horizon, they had no idea they were heading toward a mystery that would haunt their families, their town, and anyone who hears this story for years to come. What happened to Emma and Liam in that desolate corner of Utah? Why did a weekend escape turn into a nightmare that wouldn't be solved for nearly a decade? We're just getting started. So stick with the crime o'clock as we unravel the chilling truth, step by step. Emma and Liam were supposed to be back home by Sunday evening, April 10th, 2011. The plan was clear. 3 days in the Utah desert, camping under the stars, snapping photos of the rugged landscape, and then back to their cozy Colorado apartment to cuddle with their cat, Muffin, and swap stories about their adventure. Emma's brother, Matt, was expecting a call or text from her. Maybe a photo of some stunning desert sunset she couldn't wait to share. Liam's co-workers were ready to hear him groan about sleeping on the hard ground, even though he'd never admit he loved every second of it just because it made Emma happy. But Sunday evening came and went, and the phone line stayed silent. No call, no text, no sign of Old Blue pulling into their driveway. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Maybe they hit a snag, flat tire, bad cell reception, or just lost track of time stargazing. These things happen, right? The desert's a big place, and cell towers aren't exactly sprouting up among the cacti. By Monday morning, though, that little niggle of worry started to grow. Emma and Liam weren't the type to flake. Emma was meticulous, always checking in with Matt or her parents, especially after a trip. Liam, the reliable one, had never missed a day of work without a heads up. When Matt couldn't reach Emma's phone, it went straight to voicemail. He called Liam's. Same thing. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He reached out to their parents, their friends, anyone who might have heard from them. Nobody had. Their neighbor, who'd been feeding Muffin, said old Blue hadn't shown up, and the apartment was still empty. By noon, when both Emma and Liam failed to show up at their jobs, the worry turned into full-blown panic. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Matt didn't waste another second. He called the local police in their Colorado town, his voice shaking as he explained that his sister and her boyfriend were missing. The police took it seriously, especially when they learned the couple had gone to the remote deserts of southern Utah, a place as beautiful as it was unforgiving. They contacted the Utah authorities, and by Monday afternoon, a search operation was spinning up. The plan was to focus on the area Emma and Liam had mentioned, a stretch of desert near old uranium mines, about 6 hours from their home. Friends confirmed they'd talked about camping near those abandoned sites, drawn by the eerie beauty of the forgotten mining relics. The police pulled together a team, local officers, park rangers, and a small army of volunteers who knew the area. They were hopeful, at least at first. 2 people, an SUV, a tent. They couldn't just vanish into thin air, could they? The Utah desert, though, had other ideas. If you've never been, let me paint you a picture. It's not just sand and tumbleweeds. It's a maze of towering canyons, jagged rock formations, and dry riverbeds that twist and turn for miles. The roads out there, especially the ones leading to the old mines, aren't on any GPS. They're barely roads at all. Faded tracks carved out decades ago, now half buried under dust and time. Finding 2 people in that vastness is like trying to spot a single grain of sand in a storm. The search team spread out, some in trucks and ATVs, others on foot, combing the area where Emma and Liam were headed. A helicopter buzzed overhead, its blades chopping through the silence, scanning for any glint of metal, any splash of color that might be a tent or a campfire. Volunteers called their names, their voices echoing off the canyon walls, but the desert gave nothing back. No tracks, no scraps of clothing, no sign of life. Just heat, wind, and an oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow every sound. Days dragged on, and the hope that had fueled the search began to flicker. The desert doesn't play nice with mistakes. Daytime temperatures soared past 90 degrees, baking the ground until it cracked. At night, it plunged to near freezing, a brutal swing that could sap anyone's strength. If Emma and Liam had run out of water or gotten lost, their chances were shrinking by the hour. The police started exploring other possibilities. Maybe they never made it to Utah. Could they have had an accident on the way? But their route showed no wrecks, no reports of trouble. Maybe they decided to disappear, start a new life somewhere else? That theory fell apart fast. Their bank accounts hadn't been touched. Their credit cards were dormant. They'd left Muffin behind, with a neighbor's promise to look after him. Hardly the move of people planning to vanish forever. A criminal angle seemed unlikely, too. That part of Utah was the middle of nowhere, with barely a soul around. The odds of a random attack were slim to none. So where were they? The search stretched into a week, each day heavier than the last. Emma's parents drove down from Colorado, joining volunteers who refused to give up. Matt handed out flyers with Emma and Liam's smiling faces, his eyes red from sleepless nights. The helicopter kept circling, burning through fuel and hope. The police were starting to talk about scaling back, preparing the families for the worst. If Emma and Liam were out there, exposed to the elements, the odds weren't good. Dehydration, heat stroke, hypothermia. Anyone could have taken them. But something didn't add up. They had supplies, a car, a plan. They weren't reckless. How could 2 people, with all their gear, just evaporate in a place where even a footprint should have lingered in the sand? The desert was hiding something, and it wasn't ready to give up its secrets yet. As the 7th day dawned, with the search teams exhausted and the families clinging to fading hope, a call crackled over the radio. The helicopter pilot had spotted something, a faint glint in the sun, down a barely visible track leading toward the old mines. It was Old Blue, Emma and Liam's SUV, sitting alone in the middle of nowhere, its hazard lights blinking weakly. The discovery sent a jolt through the search teams, a spark of hope in the darkness. But it also raised a chilling question. If their car was here, where were Emma and Liam? And why had they left it behind? We're diving deeper into this mystery. So stay with the Crime O'Clock as we follow the trail to a truth that's darker than you can imagine. What's the longest you've ever been out of contact in a remote place? Maybe a camping trip where your phone died, or a hike where you lost signal for hours. How did it feel, knowing help might be miles away? Drop your story in the comments and tell us, could you survive a night in the Utah desert with no way to call for help? Your experiences bring this story to life. So hit that comment section and share. The Utah desert had been silent for 7 days, holding tight to the secret of Emma and Liam's disappearance. By April 17, 2011, the search for the young Colorado couple had stretched every resource to its limit. Police, park rangers, and volunteers had scoured miles of canyons, dry riverbeds, and forgotten trails, their boots kicking up dust that seemed to mock their efforts. Emma's parents and her brother, Matt, were out there too, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, clinging to the hope that somewhere in this endless expanse, their loved ones were waiting to be found. The helicopter's drone had become a familiar sound, cutting through the sky as it swept over the rugged terrain, searching for any sign, a tent, a campfire, a glimpse of Old Blue, the trusty SUV. But the desert gave nothing back, not a single clue. And with every passing hour, the weight of the unknown grew heavier. The families were grappling with questions that had no answers. Emma and Liam weren't reckless adventurers. They'd planned this trip carefully, packing enough water and food for 3 days, mapping out their route to a remote stretch of southern Utah near old uranium mines. They weren't the type to wander off into danger or ignore basic survival instincts. So why hadn't they called? Why hadn't anyone seen them? The police had checked every gas station, diner, and campsite along their route from Colorado. No one remembered a couple matching their description. No one had spotted Old Blue, and their phones were still going straight to voicemail. The desert was vast, sure, but it was starting to feel like it had swallowed them whole, car and all, leaving nothing behind but silence. As the 7th day of the search dawned, hope was fading like the morning mist. The police were preparing to scale back the operation, a grim acknowledgement that Emma and Liam's chances of survival were dwindling. In the desert, mistakes are deadly. Daytime heat could hit triple digits, sucking the life out of anyone without water. Nighttime brought a bone-chilling cold that could turn a bad situation worse. If they were out there, lost or injured, time was running out. Matt refused to accept it, handing out flyers with Emma's bright smile and Liam's steady gaze, begging anyone who'd listen to keep looking. Emma's mom clutched a photo of the couple, taken just weeks before, their arms around each other, laughing like the world was theirs. The volunteers, many of them strangers moved by the story, kept going, their voices hoarse from shouting Emma and Liam's names into the canyons. Then, just when it seemed the desert would never give up its secrets, a crackle came over the police radio. It was the helicopter pilot, his voice tight with urgency. He'd spotted something, a faint glint of metal in the sun, tucked down a barely visible track that snaked toward the old uranium mines. The search teams converged, their hearts pounding with a mix of dread and hope. They found it. Old Blue, Emma and Liam's SUV, sitting alone in the middle of a dusty, forgotten road. The hazard lights were still on, flickering weakly, the battery nearly drained. It was as if the car had been waiting there, a silent sentinel, for someone to notice it. The sight sent a chill through the searchers. This was the first real lead in a week, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt wrong, like the desert was finally showing its hand, and it wasn't good. The police approached cautiously, their eyes scanning for any sign of life. The SUV was intact, no dents, no shattered windows, no signs of a crash or a break-in. The doors were unlocked, as if Emma and Liam had stepped out expecting to come right back. Inside, everything looked frozen in time. A crumpled map of the area lay on the passenger seat, a red pen circling their planned campsite near the mines. An empty water bottle rolled on the floor, a half-eaten granola bar wrapper tucked in the center console. Liam's phone was in the glove compartment, its battery still holding a decent charge, but there were no missed calls, no texts, No attempts to dial 911. That didn't make sense. If they were in trouble, why hadn't they tried to call for help? The police checked the signal. Spotty, sure, but not impossible. Something wasn't adding up. Then they found the GPS, still powered on, its screen glowing faintly. It showed a route, clear as day, leading from their current location to a point just a couple of miles away. A specific spot marked by the coordinates of an old uranium mine. The discovery was like a jolt of electricity through the team. This wasn't just a clue. It was a breadcrumb, a sign that Emma and Liam had been headed somewhere specific. But why? Had they gone looking for help? For shelter? The police checked the SUV's gas tank, and the answer to why it was abandoned became clear. It was bone dry. They'd run out of fuel, right here in the middle of nowhere. It explained the hazard lights, blinking to signal their presence, hoping someone would see. But it didn't explain where they'd gone next. If they were stranded, why not stay with the car, the safest place to wait for rescue? Why head toward a mine, of all places? The search teams didn't hesitate. They followed the GPS route, a faint path scorched by decades of sun, winding through the desert toward the mine. The air grew heavier as they approached, the silence of the landscape pressing in. The mine's entrance loomed ahead, a narrow gash in the rock, framed by rusted metal scraps and splintered boards. It was the kind of place that screamed danger, a relic from the 1950s, when uranium fever gripped the region. The searchers called out Emma and Liam's names, their voices swallowed by the dark mouth of the mine. Nothing came back, not even an echo. They scanned the area for footprints, a dropped water bottle, anything. But the wind and sand had erased any trace of recent visitors. The mine was a dead end, at least for now. Going inside without gear was too risky. Old mines like these were death traps, prone to collapses or poisoned by trap gases. Still, the discovery of Old Blue changed everything. It gave the search new life, a focal point to rally around. The police doubled down, bringing in more volunteers, more equipment, determined to follow this lead. But the questions were piling up faster than answers. Why had Emma and Liam driven to this remote track? Why hadn't they taken their supplies? The tent, the sleeping bags, the food. And why did the GPS point to that mine? A place they had no reason to explore. The families clung to the hope that they were still out there, maybe holed up somewhere, waiting. But deep down, a darker fear was taking root. Something had happened to Emma and Liam, something the desert wasn't ready to reveal. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of that mine, and it would take 8 long years to uncover it. Stay with the crime o'clock, because this story's about to take a turn into the unthinkable. For 8 long years, the disappearance of Emma and Liam remained a gaping wound in the hearts of their families and their small Colorado town. After the discovery of their SUV Old Blue, on that desolate Utah desert track, in April 2011, the search for the couple had fizzled out. The police had combed every inch of the area around that old uranium mine, shouting their names into the dark, narrow entrance. But the desert gave nothing back. No tent, no sleeping bags, no trace of a couple who'd set out for a simple weekend getaway. The case went cold, filed away in police archives under missing persons. A haunting mystery that became a campfire tale whispered among locals. Emma's brother, Matt, and their parents never stopped hoping. But as the years ticked by, 2012, 2013, 2014, the world moved on, leaving their grief to echo in silence. The flyers with Emma and Liam's smiling faces faded on bulletin boards, and the old mine stood as a mute witness to whatever had happened. Fast forward to a scorching autumn day in 2019, 8 years after Emma and Liam vanished. 2 local guys, not detectives or adventurers, just regular folks looking to make a quick buck, were out in the Utah desert hunting for scrap metal. The area around the old uranium mines was a treasure trove of forgotten junk, rusted beams, old tools, relics from the 1950s mining boom. They weren't thinking about missing persons or cold cases. They were thinking about how much they could get for a truckload of metal. Their beat-up pickup rattled along the same forgotten roads where Old Blue had been found, heading toward that same mine the police had searched years ago. They didn't know about the GPS coordinates or the couple's story. To them, it was just another site, a dark hole in the rock promising a payday. When they pulled up to the mine's entrance, Something felt off. They'd been to plenty of abandoned mines before, usually just open holes littered with debris, maybe a faded keep out sign if they were lucky. But this one was different. The entrance wasn't just cluttered with junk, it was sealed. Someone had dragged a thick, rusted sheet of metal across the opening, propping it up with heavy stones and splintered beams. It looked deliberate, like someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one was getting in or out. To the scrap collectors, that metal sheet was a gold mine, worth more than the scattered scraps they usually found. They hauled out their gas cutter, its flame hissing as they worked through the heat of the day, slicing a hole just big enough to crawl through. It took hours, sweat dripping, the desert sun relentless. When they finally broke through, a wave of cold, musty air hit them, the kind of air that's been trapped for years, untouched by the outside world. One of the men grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness inside. At first, it was just what they expected. Bare stone walls coated in dust, a floor strewn with pebbles and old debris. The mine's first chamber was small, maybe 15 meters deep, a straight shot into the rock. He swung the light around, checking for anything worth salvaging. Then the beam stopped, frozen on something that didn't belong. There, at the far end of the chamber, were two figures, sitting against the wall. Their heads were slightly bowed, their shoulders slumped, pressed close together like they were sharing a quiet moment. The man blinked, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. Were they mannequins? Piles of old clothes? He called to his partner, his voice shaky. The second guy peered in, and they both stood there, staring into the dark, the flashlight trembling in the first man's hand. It hit them at the same time. Those weren't mannequins. They were people. The way they sat, so calm, so still, was unnerving. There was no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of a fight. Just two figures, perfectly preserved in the dry, sealed air of the mine. Their hiking clothes, faded and brittle from years of decay, clung to their mummified bodies. The men didn't scream or run. They were too stunned. One of them whispered, almost to himself, "Those are people." The other nodded, his throat tight. They knew no one could survive in a sealed mine, not for days, let alone years. They backed out, climbed into their pickup, and drove miles until they hit a spot with cell service. Their call to the police was short, their voices flat with shock. "We found bodies in the mine." The news spread like wildfire, shaking the small Utah town and reaching Colorado in hours. The police officers who'd worked Emma and Liam's case in 2011 felt a chill when they heard the location. That same mine, the one old Blues GPS had pointed to. A team was dispatched immediately, forensic experts and investigators piling into vehicles, racing to the site. The scene inside was exactly as the scrap collectors described. Two bodies, a man and a woman, sitting side by side against the cold stone wall. Their clothes, though decayed, matched the hiking gear Emma and Liam had been wearing. There were no backpacks, no water bottles, no signs of a camp. Just the two of them, locked in that eerie, eternal stillness. The dry air had mummified them, preserving their features enough to make identification possible. When DNA tests came back, there was no doubt. It was Emma and Liam. After 8 years of anguish, their families finally knew where they were. But the relief of finding them was drowned out by a new, terrifying question. What had happened in that mine? The discovery wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a nightmare. How did Emma and Liam end up in a sealed mine? Who, or what, had trapped them there? And why were they sitting so calmly, as if they'd simply chosen to rest in the dark? The answers were out there, buried in the dust and shadows of that desert tomb, and they were more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Stay with the crime o'clock, because this mystery is about to take a darker turn. Imagine you're those scrap collectors, stumbling across a sealed mine with two bodies inside. Your flashlight catches them sitting there, silent, in the dark. Would you dare crawl further into that mine to see what else was hidden? Or would you get out as fast as you could? Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in that heart-stopping moment? Your reactions make this story come alive. So let's hear them. The discovery of Emma and Liam's bodies in that Utah mine in 2019 didn't bring closure. It cracked open a mystery that was darker and more twisted than anyone could have predicted. The police and forensic team worked carefully in the oppressive silence of the mine, the air thick with dust and the weight of what they'd found. Emma and Liam, sitting side by side, looked almost peaceful, their mummified forms preserved by the desert's dry embrace. But the scene raised more questions than answers. How did they end up here, 15 meters inside a sealed mine? Why were there no signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings, just their bodies against a wall? The investigators knew this wasn't a simple case of two hikers getting lost. Something sinister had happened, and they were determined to piece it together, no matter how chilling the truth might be. The forensic examination started with the bodies themselves. Emma and Liam's hiking clothes, faded jackets, worn boots, were intact, no tears or bloodstains to suggest an attack. No cuts, no bullet wounds, nothing to indicate they'd fought for their lives. But when the medical examiner conducted the autopsies, a shocking detail emerged. Both had multiple fractures in their legs, shins and feet shattered in ways that didn't happen by accident. These were injuries you'd see from a fall, a big one, like dropping from a significant height onto a hard surface. The kind of fall that would leave you immobilized, in agony, unable to walk or climb. The investigators' minds raced. Had Emma and Liam fallen into the mine somehow? If so, how did they end up sitting so calmly? And who had sealed the entrance with that heavy metal sheet? The mine itself held more clues and more mysteries. The chamber where the bodies were found was small, a dead-end pocket, just off the main entrance. But above Emma and Liam, the investigators noticed something odd. A vertical shaft in the ceiling, a dark, narrow chute leading upward, maybe toward the surface. It was barely wide enough for a person to slip through, hidden by years of dust and debris. The team began to piece together a theory. What if Emma and Liam hadn't walked into the mine through the main entrance? What if they'd fallen through that shaft, dropping several meters onto the stone floor below? It would explain the broken legs, the kind of injuries you'd get from a fall like that. But it didn't explain the sealed entrance. That metal sheet was the real puzzle. It wasn't just propped against the mine's entrance. It had been welded shut, fused to the rock with professional precision. And here's where it got truly bizarre. The welds were on the inside of the sheet. Someone had sealed the mine from within, trapping Emma and Liam inside. But there was no welding equipment in the mine, no torch, no generator, no tools of any kind. It was as if the person who'd done it had vanished into thin air. The investigators couldn't wrap their heads around it. If Emma and Liam had fallen and were injured, unable to move, someone must have found them in that state. But instead of helping, that someone had welded them in, leaving them to die. The thought was monstrous, a level of cruelty that felt almost inhuman. The police combed the area around the mine, looking for anything they might have missed in 2011. They checked the vertical shaft, trying to trace where it led. It opened to the surface, hidden by a pile of old boards and brush, the kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. This supported the fall theory. Emma and Liam could have been walking, maybe at dusk, and stepped onto a fragile covering that gave way, sending them crashing into the mine. But the welded sheet raised a chilling question. Who found them? And why did they seal the entrance instead of calling for help? The lack of belongings, no backpacks, no water bottles, added to the mystery. Had someone taken their supplies? Or had they never made it to the mine with them? The police were now hunting for someone who knew this mine, who had the skills to weld, and who was capable of something so cold-blooded. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was starting to look like a deliberate act, one that had been hidden for 8 years inside a tomb of stone and metal. The families, notified of the discovery, were devastated but demanded answers. Matt, Emma's brother, sat in stunned silence as the police explained the fractures, the welds, the impossible scene. The hope they'd clung to for nearly a decade was gone, replaced by a horror they couldn't comprehend. The investigation shifted gears, moving from a missing persons case to something far darker. The police knew they were dealing with someone who turned that mine into a grave, and they were determined to find out who. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and it was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The investigation into Emma and Liam's deaths was no longer about finding a lost couple. It was about uncovering a crime that chilled even the most seasoned detectives. The scene in that Utah mine was like something out of a nightmare. 2 people, mummified, sitting calmly against a wall, their legs shattered from a fall, trapped inside a chamber sealed from the inside. The police had a theory, but it was so horrifying they could barely speak it aloud. Emma and Liam hadn't wandered into that mine and gotten lost. They'd fallen through a hidden vertical shaft, likely covered by brush or rotten boards on the surface, plunging several meters onto the stone floor below. The impact had broken their legs, leaving them helpless, unable to climb out or even crawl to the main entrance. Alive but immobilized, they'd sat there in the dark, waiting for help that never came. But that wasn't the worst of it. Someone had found them in that state, wounded, vulnerable, probably calling out in pain, and instead of offering aid, that person had made a choice so cruel it defied comprehension. They dragged a heavy metal sheet to the mine's side entrance, hauled in a welding machine and a generator, and sealed the opening shut, welding it from the inside. Then somehow, they'd vanished, leaving no trace of the equipment behind. The welds were clean, professional, the work of someone who knew what they were doing. This wasn't a random act of panic or negligence. It was calculated, deliberate, a death sentence carried out with cold precision. Emma and Liam had been left to die slowly, in darkness, from hunger, thirst, or the agony of their injuries. The thought was unbearable, a betrayal of every instinct to help, to save, to care. The police tried to piece together the sequence of events. The vertical shaft explained the fall, the broken bones. Maybe Emma and Liam had been out exploring, taking photos as the sun set, and missed the hidden opening. A misstep, a crack of wood, and they were gone, tumbling into the mine's depths. They could have survived the fall, at least for a while, shouting for help until their voices gave out. But who had come across them? Who had access to welding equipment in the middle of the desert, and the knowledge to use it? And how had they escaped a sealed mine without leaving a single tool behind? The absence of equipment was baffling. A welding machine, a generator. These weren't things you could carry out in your pocket. There had to be another exit, some hidden passage the police hadn't found. Investigators scoured the mine for clues, mapping its twists and turns. The main chamber was small, but the vertical shaft suggested a network of tunnels, maybe ventilation shafts or old service passages, that could lead elsewhere. They searched the surrounding area, looking for signs of another entrance, a crevice, anything that could explain the disappearance of the welder. They also started digging into the mine's history. Those uranium mines dated back to the 1950s, abandoned when the boom ended, left to decay under the desert sun. Most were public land now, but some plots, including this one, were leased to private individuals. The police began pulling records, looking for anyone with a connection to the site, someone who knew its secrets, its hidden paths, its dangers. The families were desperate for answers, but the truth was starting to feel like a poison. Emma's parents sat through briefings, their faces pale, as detectives explained the fall, the welds, the likelihood that someone had chosen to bury their daughter and her boyfriend alive. Matt, Emma's brother, couldn't speak. His mind stuck on the image of his sister trapped in that dark, cold place, her legs broken, her hope fading. The police knew this wasn't just about finding a killer. It was about understanding a mind capable of such cruelty. Whoever did this wasn't just hiding from justice. They were hiding from humanity itself. The investigation was now a manhunt, and the desert was starting to whisper its secrets. The truth was close, and it was darker than the shadows of that mine. Put yourself in the investigator's shoes for a moment. You're standing in that mine, staring at a welded sheet of metal, knowing two people were left to die behind it. Who do you think did this? A random stranger passing by, or someone with a deeper motive? Drop your theories in the comments. What kind of person could commit such a heartless act? Let's get this discussion going. The police were now hunting a monster, someone who turned an abandoned Utah mine into a tomb for Emma and Liam. The investigation had uncovered a chilling truth. The couple had likely fallen through a hidden shaft, breaking their legs, and someone had found them in that helpless state, only to weld the mine's entrance shut, condemning them to a slow, agonizing death. For 2 years, from 2019 to 2021, the police chased every lead, determined to find the person responsible. They started with the land itself. Most of the old uranium mines were on public property, but the one where Emma and Liam were found was part of a long-term lease held by a private individual. That's where their focus turned, and it led them to a man who'd been hiding in plain sight. He was a 60-year-old loner named Carl, living on a small ranch about 30 miles from the mine. Carl wasn't a miner or a prospector. He was a recluse who'd leased the land for decades, claiming it was for geological research, though no one could recall him doing any actual work. Neighbors described him as cold, territorial, the kind of guy who'd glare at you for stepping a foot onto his property. He'd had run-ins with tourists and hunters before, chasing them off with a scowl and a warning. To the police, he was the first real suspect they'd had, a man who knew the area, who had the skills to weld, and who might have seen Emma and Liam as intruders on his land. They obtained a search warrant for Carl's ranch, a dusty spread of sagebrush and old sheds. He met them at the door, his face hard, his eyes narrow, with barely concealed hostility. He claimed he knew nothing about any missing tourists, said he hadn't been near that mine in years. But his words faltered when the police searched his workshop. Hanging on a nail among rusted tools was a set of keys, old, heavy ones, the kind used to lock gates on mine entrances. In a desk drawer, buried under a pile of yellowed bills, they found something else, a rolled-up sheet of paper, brittle with age. It wasn't just a map. It was a detailed diagram of the mine's internal passages, marking the main entrance, the vertical shaft, and several narrow ventilation tunnels unknown even to the mining authorities. One of those tunnels led to the surface, nearly a mile from the main entrance. It was the answer to the impossible question: how had the welder escaped without a trace? When they showed Carl the diagram, his defenses crumbled. He didn't confess with tears or remorse. He spoke in a flat, emotionless tone, like he was explaining a chore. He said he'd been patrolling his land that day in 2011, checking for trespassers, when he heard screams coming from a mine. He followed the sound and found Emma and Liam at the bottom of the vertical shaft, injured and calling for help. He admitted they'd fallen through a trap he'd set years ago, rotten boards placed over the shaft to keep animals out. In his mind, they weren't victims. They were intruders, people who'd violated his sacred space. He didn't speak to them, didn't offer help. He just walked away, silent as a ghost. Carl returned to his ranch, loaded a welding machine and a generator into his pickup, and drove to the mine's side entrance. He dragged the metal sheet into place, fired up the equipment, and welded it shut, sealing Emma and Liam inside. To him, it wasn't murder. It was securing his property. He used one of the secret ventilation tunnels to slip out, carrying the equipment with him, leaving no trace. He insisted he didn't mean to kill them, that they were to blame for trespassing. The fact that they were dying in agony behind that welded sheet didn't seem to faze him. It was just business, a problem solved. The police listened, stunned by his cold detachment, his utter lack of humanity. The evidence was overwhelming, the keys, the diagram, his admission. They had their man, but the weight of his actions was almost too much to bear. Emma and Liam hadn't been hunted or attacked. They'd been abandoned, left to suffer in a way that was both cruel and calculated. The police realized they weren't just dealing with a crime. They were facing a man whose paranoia and hatred of outsiders had turned him into something far worse than a killer. The case was headed to trial, and the families were about to face the final chapter of their decade-long nightmare. The trial of Carl, the reclusive rancher who'd sealed Emma and Liam inside that Utah mine, was a quiet affair, but its impact was profound. It took place in 2021, 2 years after the discovery of the couple's bodies, and 10 years after their disappearance in 2011. The courtroom was packed with reporters, locals, and the families of Emma and Liam, their faces a mix of grief and determination. Matt, Emma's brother, sat in the front row, clutching a photo of his sister, while their parents held each other, bracing for the truth. Carl sat stone-faced, his eyes fixed on the floor, showing no trace of remorse. The prosecution laid out the evidence. The mine diagram, the keys, the welds, and Carl's own confession, delivered in that chilling, matter-of-fact tone. There was no question of his guilt, but the charge was a careful one. Intentional abandonment leading to the death of 2 persons. Proving murder was tricky. Carl hadn't struck them, hadn't shot them. He'd simply walked away, welding the door shut behind him. But the prosecution argued that his actions were as deadly as any weapon. He'd found Emma and Liam, broken and helpless, and chosen to entomb them, knowing they'd die of hunger, thirst, or their injuries. The welds, the hidden tunnel, the deliberate cover-up, it all pointed to a man who understood the consequences of his choice. The defense tried to paint him as a loner, a man obsessed with his land, not a killer. But the image of two young people, trapped in darkness, their legs shattered, haunted the courtroom. The jury didn't take long to decide. Carl was sentenced to 18 years in prison, a term that felt both heavy and hollow to those who loved Emma and Liam. It was justice, but it couldn't undo the pain, couldn't bring back the years of hope and heartbreak. The family spoke after the verdict, their voices trembling with a mix of relief and sorrow. Emma's mom talked about her daughter's love for photography, how she'd captured beauty in everything. Liam's dad shared memories of his son's quiet strength, his devotion to Emma. Matt, struggling through tears, said he just wanted them to be remembered, not as victims, but as two people who loved fiercely and lived fully, even if only for a moment. The case left a mark on everyone who heard it. It wasn't just the loss of Emma and Liam. It was the stark reminder of how a single act of indifference could destroy lives. The desert, with its endless canyons and hidden dangers, had played its part, but it was Carl's cold, twisted logic that turned a tragedy into a crime. The story of Emma and Liam became a cautionary tale, a warning about the perils of isolation and the darkness that can lurk in a human heart. As the courtroom emptied, the families walked out into the Utah sun, carrying their grief, but also a sense of closure, however fragile. Think about that verdict for a moment. 18 years for leaving two people to die in a sealed mine. Does that feel like justice to you? Could any sentence ever be enough for a crime this cruel? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what justice means in a case like this. Your perspective matters, so hit that comment section. The story of Emma and Liam is one that sticks with you, isn't it? A young couple, full of love and dreams, set out for a weekend in the Utah desert, only to vanish into a mystery that took a decade to unravel. They were found in a sealed mine, their lives stolen not by some monstrous villain from a movie, but by the cold indifference of a man who saw them as nothing more than intruders. Carl's actions, welding that mine shut, leaving them to die in darkness, reveal a truth that's hard to face. Sometimes, the greatest dangers aren't the wilds of the desert, but the choices of those who walk among us. This is the Crime O'Clock, and we're here to bring you stories that haunt, that challenge, that make you think. If this tale gripped you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more mysteries that'll keep you up at night. Want to support the channel? Check out our Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. It means the world. Next week, we've got another chilling story waiting, so don't miss it. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you at the next Crime O'Clock.